Last week in part one, my guest brought us to the point in the Delphi murders where a local predator, a scumbag, who appears to be the perfect suspect on paper, is brought in and questioned. This, mind you, as Libby and Abby's killer is hiding in plain sight. Here, with the conclusion of the Delphi murders, in part two, we find out how law enforcement got their man, along with new information my guests share regarding how there can be no doubt this suspect abducted and killed those girls. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 25 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. Just one little side note before we get going. If you are tapping into the show for the first time with this episode, I encourage you to go back 1 week to last week's episode and listen to part one of this case, then come back here for part two. I don't generally do cases in two parts. I do one case per week most of the time. So this is a special Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps. Indiana investigators have a suspect, Cain, and he appears to be the perfect murder candidate. On paper, that is. Cain, who has been presenting himself online as a young teen, Anthony Schatz, had communicated with one of the girls, Libby, on the day the girls went missing and were murdered. He lives in Peru, Indiana, not too far away from Delphi. He collects child porn. He seeks kids out online. Just your all-around common piece of trash. The question becomes, is Cain also a murderer? He looks nothing like the first sketch generated by that video of Bridge Guy. Yet, a second sketch is created, and this one does somewhat resemble Cain. That said, however, there are still a couple of major issues with this guy. Here once again are my guests from the Murder Sheet podcast, Aine and Kevin.
Cain is a big man. He's a pretty large guy, so he does not look at all like the video of Bridge Guy. He does not resemble. It's not the right shape. And also his voice does not sound like the audio recording of Bridge Guy. So there's a problem there, but it's still, definitely worth noting.
Yeah, it was an intriguing lead.
Yeah, they got to look into that.
Even though law enforcement has not yet released the video taken from the girl's phone, they do release a still image from the video of Bridge Guy. This causes some conversation online and within the Delphi community. Investigators want to talk to this guy. After all, he was the last person to see the girls. That is very clear. For investigative purposes, they don't come out and call him a suspect, but it's obvious that he could be connected to the girls' murders. Within all of that, something else happens.
I think pretty quickly it started to shift to, we really want to talk to this guy. And then it becomes, why is this guy not coming forward? And actually what we learned is he did. I will say also with Cain, this is the curse of too many people trying to help. Cain is looked at in February of 2017, basically due to what seems like a series of miscommunications. They look at him, they look at his DNA, and it's, they think they have DNA at this point, but they don't really follow up further. And so he actually is initially sort of detained and talked to, but I think a ball was dropped there. Unbeknownst to members of the public, but certainly well known by people in law enforcement, is that there's multiple sketches. And the first one drawn was actually by a witness named Betsy Blair. Betsy Blair is a sort of middle-aged woman who was hiking the trails, same time as Libby and Abby. She saw them. She saw the girls walking towards the bridge. And before that, she saw something that became very relevant. She saw a man on the bridge. She saw Bridge Guy. She described his clothing and his appearance as being that of the guy in Libby's video. He was on the platform, the first platform of the bridge, and he looked at her, and she thought he seemed to be waiting for someone else. She turns around and continues her hike, and then when this happens, she comes forward. So what she saw, and keep in mind, Betsy Blair is an older woman, she saw a man she thought facially looked younger. So she thought he kind of was round face. The sketch looks a bit different than Bridge Guy because it's just a more youthful looking guy. And instead of having a hat, he has kind of poofy hair. I would argue that if you actually kind of strip away some of the details, the face shape, eyes, nose, mouth, all actually look more similar than you would think. And that some of the details might be colored by, an older woman might see a younger man. A younger woman might see an older man. It's all about perspectives. But anyway, so Betsy Blair is the source for this second released but first drawn sketch. And they come out with this, authorities come out with this at a press conference where, as you mentioned, they also release some of this video, some more audio. So it's now, instead of down the hill, it's guys down the hill. And this creates a big firestorm because I think a lot of people, myself included, I remember when this came out, we were like, are they about to arrest someone? Like, what's happening? Like, this seems like a really big deal. But what we learned since is that they were essentially trying to talk to the killer at this press conference. Like, this was a press conference for one guy, and that guy was the killer, where they were trying to goad him into doing something so that they could catch him.
And it did not work.
It did not work.
This is an excellent example of how investigations work in the real world. There is so much going on behind the scenes during this type of murder investigation. The public only has a one-dimensional view of things, which is generally tightly controlled by the authorities, as it should be. They know they have a killer lurking about, likely right in that community. They know this guy is unorganized and he's not that smart. They know he will make a mistake. They also know that he is unlikely to sit by quietly and allow them to get close without meddling. So they try to push him into making that mistake. It's great police work, actually. It shows the depths of empathy and concern they all have for this community and the victims' families. Yet even within all of that going on, they don't give up on child predator Kegan Kline. They just don't want to write him off as in the clear because they cannot say for certain at this point. He cannot be fully excluded, so he has to be included. The video isn't clear enough to get any type of facial recognition, or nobody's recognizing this guy, right?
That's correct. The thing to remember about this video is Libby is taking this video. It's mainly in the foreground. There's Abby, and then there's this person behind her. So the image that is released is just like a small section of the background of this video. So it's very blurry, kind of pixelated, and it's difficult to really tell any facial features. You can't even tell clearly if the person is wearing a hat or not.
And he looks to be middle-aged, the Bridge Guy. He looks to be wearing a fanny pack of some sort maybe as well, which is interesting. So that comes out, and what is the next big major moment in the investigation?
There was an announcement that the police were interested in getting more information about Anthony Shots. And so essentially the police were publicly revealing that this man, Kegan Kline, was a person of interest, for lack of a better term, in this case. And so that got more interest in the Kegan Kline lead, and the police really started taking that more seriously, to the extent that Kegan Kline is a person who told the police a wide variety of stories. And at one point he even says, yeah, I was there with my father. My father committed the murder, and we threw the murder weapon into a river. And so the police get that information. They conduct a really extensive search of the river. They don't find the murder weapon. And this is happening in 2022.
And I'll just say this. police and prosecutors don't just want anyone. They don't want to just like pin this on some guy because he is a pedophile and a bad person. They want evidence tying somebody to the scene. If it doesn't have that, they don't have anything. So they're really trying to corroborate Kegan Kline, but they're not moving forward with charging him or doing anything like that unless they have something. And all they have are his words, which are not trustworthy. And so, I mean, I just do want to say, like, there were a lot of people that came up in this investigation who they would really throw a lot of resources into and look at. But if there wasn't anything there, or there wasn't enough there, or anything concrete, they were not going to just charge that person. They really had to find something that linked them directly to the crime scene, because they realized we're going to have this hold up in court. We cannot just be trying someone and, oh, well, they seem like a pedophile, so they must have done it. No, this was a very diligent investigation. Mistakes were made, but it was a diligent investigation, I would say.
I mean, mistakes are made in every investigation. So and the public doesn't know that. You know, the public thinks, cops are infallible, like they don't make mistakes. But mistakes, there's ego, there's misogyny. It's in every investigation. It's not just confined to some. So that's important, I think, for people to understand. The investigation then gets a jolt. Call it luck or divine intervention or whatever it is you want to call it. Something incredible happens next. Let's take our first break here and come back and find out how they lock on to the actual bridge guy. You won't believe this. Be right back. The predator, Kegan Kline, and his potential involvement in the girls' murders just won't go away. As I said earlier, he is a scumbag who likes child porn, a real nasty piece of work. And his profile just kind of fits into this case too perfectly. Yet there is this hovering sense of intuition among investigators regarding Kline that he is not involved in the murders. In that sense, they have been trying to fit him into the murder scenario, and it's just not happening. Then the break they have all been waiting on happens.
Kline's being looked at, but they're kind of running out of things to do with Kline at this point, because he's nothing he's saying is being backed up. He tells a story about riding in a red Jeep to the crime. There's no red Jeep on the relevant surveillance footage that would have shown a car going there. So, they're kind of like, okay, we've tried to corroborate this and it's just not working out. So at some point, though, kind of overlapping with that is, there's a wonderful local woman named Kathy Shank. This is a woman who dedicated years of her life to working in child protective services in the county. At one time, she was the only agent of CPS in this county, in this rural county. So she's like, her whole life is dedicated to protecting local children. And she knows all of law enforcement in the community, and they know her. So when, these murders happen, she volunteers, hey, let me be your basically office assistant. I will help you. I know the importance of confidentiality here. I'm not just some random person volunteering, but let me help organize stuff. Let me help, schedule stuff. So she comes in and is doing that. And over time, she goes from just someone who's kind of maybe grabbing lunch for people or baking cookies to someone who's actually organizing a lot of the case file. The office had to move a number of times between buildings over the years. So things are in boxes, things need to be unpacked. And she's continuously going through that and sorting it. And one day, September 21st, 2022, actually, which happened to be the birthday of her late husband, which, she was there working to kind of avoid that in a way. She finds this file and she reads it, and she knows everybody who was supposed to be on the trails that day. All the investigators who are working on, they know all the names, the locations, where everyone was. And this name is unfamiliar to her. So she's like, something's wrong about this.
Such a keen sense of awareness there. Here is a woman in the throes of grief herself, immersing herself in her work to avoid that sadness and pain of losing a loved one. And all of a sudden, she sees something in the file that hits her right between the eyes like an epiphany.
She goes to Tony Liggett, who is one of the detectives for the county on the case, and she shows it to him, and he's like, they're both floored. Like, this was misfiled. This was lost for years. But now what we're seeing, the tip is a man named, he's in the file as Richard Whiteman. That's not his name, but he lives on Whiteman Street. And he called in just days after the murder saying, hey, I was on the trails that day. I saw these 3 other girls who were also on the trails. One of them had dark hair. And, you know, I just wanted you guys to know I was on the trails. I didn't see anybody, but, you know, I was there.
And what was crucial is police had talked to those 3 girls. They described seeing a man on the trail that day who was unidentified, but the man they saw was dressed identically to Bridge Guy.
They, of course, learned that this guy is not using his real name. His real name is Richard Allen. Not too smart, I'll say, changing his last name to the name of the street he lives on. Investigators know, if you recall, that the girl's killer is likely lacking in the intelligence part of his brain. They know he is unorganized and, well, I'll just say it, he's stupid. They know they will catch him if they play their cards right.
So basically, the girls saw Bridge Guy, and then we have this report from this Richard Allen saying, I was there, I saw these girls. It certainly is made them realize this could be Bridge Guy.
Yeah.
This could be the killer.
So they all go into this immediately. It's a very big deal.
It's moments like this during investigations when everyone working the case just has this feeling, this sense of this is it. We got him. Like it is all coming together. With investigations that span years and years, an injection of energy like this to keep it going with a renewed sense of passion is a godsend. Let me ask you, you wrote the book. You obviously you're the experts in this case. I don't know much about Allen, just his type, but what made him want to be involved in this? What was it in his background and his psychology that made him want to say, I'm smarter than you, when he is clearly an idiot?
I think there may be a couple things, and we'd be speculating because unfortunately he did not ever respond to our requests for comment or an interview or anything, and nor did people close to him, nor did members of his family. But piecing it together, they wanted, I think his wife pushed him into coming forward. He made a comment like, oh, my wife, I didn't even really want to come forward, but my wife was like, he admitted to her he was there, so she is like, well, you should go to police. They want to talk to everyone who was out there that day. So that's what he said later on. And in addition to that, I think there can be, and I'm sure you've seen this in all the cases you've covered so wonderfully and in depth. Like, I would say, like, to me, sometimes a killer might be like, uh-oh, I need to get ahead of this. They clearly have me on video, so I need to come in and just be like, oh yeah, I was there for legitimate reasons. I think maybe that and the pressure from the wife may have combined to make him basically kind of chicken out or kind of be like, I need to get ahead of this and kind of overdo it in terms of that. That's just my speculation.
Well, that's good speculation. I like that. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And, with these murder cases, it's Occam's razor. The most simple answer is the answer, and that certainly fits. So when police get to him and they start looking at him, what are they finding out? What are they feeling?
They are basically finding out that he very much fits sort of some of their expectations of what Bridge Guy would look like. He's local. He's not from Delphi originally, but he's lived in Delphi for many years. He is a person who goes to Deer Creek quite a bit. He fishes, he hangs out there. There's photographic evidence of this that they find. But all in all, he's a very, very quiet person. He's not a attention-grabbing suspect like some of their past ones who were either violent or sex offenders of some type. He has been married to the same woman for many years. They've got a daughter. He is a shift manager at the local CVS. He does not have a criminal record. He just is a very quiet man.
One thing they do find when they first talk to him and they hear him speak, they all have the same realization. This is the voice of Bridge Guy.
Do they find any sort of journals, porn on his phone, on his any of that stuff? Do they find anything linking him to maybe a sadistic type of lifestyle that isn't criminal, but, private?
I would say that no. I think they find some weird porn, but I think it involves more of elderly women. Yeah, but it's not a lot necessarily. And I think the one thing that we found was when we talked to some people who had worked with him, he could be very controlling. Some women felt he was very creepy with them. They felt he was kind of leering, sexist, kind of just a gross dude. Not necessarily like murderer level, but certainly creepy to women. Others thought he was a nice boss. They didn't think he was creepy. They thought he was just a cool dude. So it kind of, he was not always the same person with everybody.
So the males thought he was cool, thought he was just a local guy. The female said, ugh.
Interestingly, it was actually more of a divide about people who worked with him at Walmart thought he was creepy. People who worked with him at CVS, he'd calmed down at that point, I think.
That seems to make sense, really.
Oh man, the poor Walmart workers. I think but some people at CVS still found him controlling. They would be like, he would micromanage me, he'd be like all up on what I was doing, and it was like, focus on yourself, And so I think there was some, but all other people said he was very nice, funny, quiet, but funny. So it really it was weird talking to people because it was like, are we all talking about the same person?
Murderers do not come in a mass-produced assembly line package. There are subtle and, at times, major differences among them. The psychology is, in a general way, basically the same, but their outward appearances and behaviors around people in their lives can vary. What's clear to me with regard to Richard Allen is that this was his first go. He had taken his fantasies into the real world and acted out on them. If he had continued, he would have undoubtedly began to adapt and change his behavior around people. This is one reason why we will soon see his wife was in so much denial later on and did not want to believe he could have killed the girls. She never saw that side of him, but it was there, bouncing around inside his very small brain, those obsessive thoughts blurring the line of reality. And I would bet that if we were able to go back into his early life and find the unencumbered truth about the guy, we'd find some sort of deviant sexual behavior, either he engaged in by himself or with others. It is absolutely there. It always is. I have to take another break here, but I'll be back in 1 minute with more of my conversation with Aine and Kevin. You are listening to Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps. We know, I think it's safe to say, that the social media idiots who inject themselves into high-profile cases, and those who are just in this to create content and attain likes and followers, want the murderer of 2 teenage girls to be wearing a clown suit, or have some sort of sexy nickname, or a long criminal past that provides a roadmap toward the current situation. But that is not how things work in the real world of investigating murderers. Richard Allen, when the tawdry, predatory, true crime community sinks its talons into him, doesn't fit the bill. He is not the face of the monster they want. So, in order to counteract that disappointment, they begin to manufacture controversy and conspiracy. It's inevitable today. And yet, whatever color you paint a barn, whatever landscaping you put around it, underneath the paint and behind the flowers, it's still a fucking barn. And the inside of that barn, i.e., the evidence, does not change because you painted the outside with ridiculous graffiti.
I will say this. He's the most boring suspect that ever came up. And I think that has ramifications for what happened with social media later on, because this is not the ending anyone expected. People wanted a big conspiracy. And this is just one dude who's super boring and has very few friends, has very little going on.
Yeah, when they get on him, things start happening pretty quickly. They talk with him. He tells them the story about being out on the trails. He says that he owns guns. They get a search warrant. They search the house. They recover the weapon. They test the weapon, and it comes up as this is the weapon that the bullet that was found on the crime scene was cycled through. So then they talk to him again, and during this interview, he says, that is my gun. No one else has ever had access to it but me. So he's basically giving them cause to arrest him.
And so he has no idea that he left that shell casing.
It was a intact cartridge, so it was an unspent round.
Okay. So he cocked a gun and it flipped out or something. He didn't know it.
You hear the gun racking on the bridge when he's accosting the girls. You hear a I think this is speculation. I think he was in such a adrenaline rush of the whole thing. I think it was just sloppiness.
Yeah. And like I say, his first go maybe of doing something like this.
I agree. I think this is his first go. I don't think other people want to connect into other cases. And I understand that impulse because you're like, how can someone wake up and do this? I think he fantasized about doing something like this for years. And then I think he got to that boiling point where he just did it. And I don't think he did it again. I don't think this was what he thought it was going to be.
Do they ever find the weapon, the knife, the razor blade, whatever he used?
They never find the blade. And we do, though, find out from some things Richard Allen said about what may have happened to it. And he describes using a box cutter that he stole from work to kill them. And then he describes going to the dumpster at his workplace afterwards and tossing that in. So if that's the case, which I believe it is, it's in a landfill.
So now what happens from there? It looks like he starts to complain about some mistreatment as we get into 2023. Of course, that's after he's lawyered up, right?
Well, what happens is he does start making complaints about treatment at prison. But what we don't know at the time is that behind the scenes, he's begun telling people that he is the killer. He's making confessions. And so perhaps as a strategic move to deal with these confessions, these complaints about prison conditions start being made. And I think one of the intent of a lot of these complaints is to suggest that, he is going crazy because of prison conditions, and this is what is motivating the confessions. Although, again, at the time that he was starting to make these complaints, the public didn't know that he was making confessions behind the scenes. He ultimately made up to 61 confessions or incriminating statements.
And to be clear, these are not confessions made to a police officer or someone in authority who's interrogating him. He's calling his wife and mother and telling them. And he's also telling mental health staff who have been dispatched to try to help him in prison. Just as a note, yes, prison, not jail. He was incarcerated in prison because the Carroll County Jail, we've been there, it's tiny. Also, basically people in jail, especially local people, there was a fear that somebody would kill him because of what, he was accused of doing at that point. So it was felt that Carroll County could not protect him. It's like a very small jail, understaffed, too few beds at that point. It's since expanded, but they wanted to put him in a place where he could be safe and survive until trial. So prison was deemed as the place where he was going to be put. He was put in a one-man cell in a pretty tough prison called Westville. So, definitely like a scary place by all means, but there was a reason for him being put there.
I need to repeat this. 61 confessions. Not one or two or a dozen. 61. The guy is screaming from the rooftop, I did this crime. It's me. Yet his family and his attorneys and the conspiracy-minded theorists and social media hacks have their hands over their ears. Shh. Don't say that, Richard. Stop it. You've been coerced into admitting this because of the treatment in prison you are receiving. Yeah, that's the ticket. Say that. It'll make for great Netflix content down the road. Say they forced these 61 confessions out of you, and that they also planted the gun. Forget about the video. Take that out of this. The guy admits to the murders 61 times. But hey, this is the age of the perpetrator turned celebrity. The perpetrator as someone being set up and framed. Forget about unimpeachable evidence. Forget about a confession. I did it, I did it, I did it. None of that matters. And his mental state at the time is monitored by psychiatrists, right? Psychologists. So how is his mental state? I mean, how do they judge it?
In the beginning, so they're throwing a lot more resources at him than seemingly any other prisoner in the state, which makes sense. I mean, he's pre-trial, right? So, they're checking in on him, I think, on a daily basis, right, Kevin?
Yeah.
He's disclosed to them, I have a history of depression, I have a history of anxiety, and they're looking at that. And in the beginning, seemingly, it's not that bad for him. He's doing things like telling them, hey, I'd like to work out and use this opportunity to discipline myself and lose some weight. So he's got goals. He's got things he's doing. And, one mental health personnel named Dr. Monica Walla in particular is really trying to help him. She's like giving him books. She's aware of the Delphi case, and she's passing on information to him saying, hey, people are supporting you. People aren't convinced that you're the guy. People are kind of confused about the case against you. So you have supporters. So she's trying to kind of keep his spirits up. It's around the time that he finds religion that things really start to go to hell, I think, as we said in the book. He becomes religious. He finds God, or so he says. He wants to become a Christian. He wants to accept Jesus Christ into his life. And he views that as part of that, he needs to disclose his sins to those who matter most to him, to his wife and mother. And he starts doing that. And he does not get a very good reception. He's basically told, stop talking to us. Shut up. You didn't do this. We don't want to hear it. Don't tell us about this. We're not even curious enough to hear you out. We just don't, shut up. Because they know the phone's being recorded. At that point, that's, I think, really when you see the behavior really spiral. Because, he's been rejected in a pretty concrete way.
So, if all else fails, hey, why not involve the occult, right? Why not bring in the kitchen sink? See if that plays for all the ghouls salivating, wanting this guy to be innocent and framed because it makes a much better story. Or rather, keeps the story going for more clicks and likes and more TikTok videos of women applying makeup while talking about the murder of 2 teenage girls.
You can actually trace it back to the initial sort of concrete, the confessions from him. Almost immediately, his defense team comes out with this, these allusions to mistreatment in prison. And then over time, this devolves into sort of this theory of a Odinist cult that sacrificed the girls. And it's the classic, don't look at that. Look over here, shiny keys, kind of trying to distract a baby with keys. That distraction and kind of ad hominem attacks were kind of the 2 hallmarks of this defense strategy.
It even goes to the extent where they say, sure, Richard Allen was confessing, but maybe he confessed because there were Odinist guards in prison who told him that if he did not confess, they would hurt his family. So they were just throwing anything against the wall. They
said that in a footnote, and they said that in the document, and then in a footnote they said, oh, just to be clear, he never said this to us.
None of this is allowed during the trial, right? It's kicked out, thank God. So it looks like he's losing weight. It looks like he's getting skinnier. Is he on a starvation diet, or what's he doing? Is he rebelling?
That's a great question. Initially, his people who were his sort of mental health providers in prison testified that he was actually doing this he was trying to lose weight. He was maybe a bit overweight, and he wanted to lose some pounds. So initially, it's just him trying to maybe work out in his cell, eat right. But over time, it becomes something where he's, refusing to eat. Although they noted this interesting thing. There's like a number of meals, if you miss, it triggers hunger strike watch, and they'll basically like potentially force feed you, and it triggers response. He would make sure not to miss that many meals. So he was in control enough to say, oh, I don't want to have that. But he's doing things like eating his own feces. Although, again, this has been described as, in one way. But then when you actually hear the people who were there testify, they say he would like try to, and then kind of not really like to do that. And it's like a lot of this struck people who were there as a lot more calculated than necessarily someone truly losing their mind. And all of these people, these correctional officers, they have to deal with people who unfortunately are mentally ill and incarcerated. Everyone knows, like, you can't turn off psychosis. You can't, if you're having a psychotic reaction, you can't just say, oh, I'm done. Sorry about that. And frequently, Richard Allen would be behaving in a certain way where people felt it was attention getting, and he would stop if he got what he wanted, or he would stop if he realized no one was paying attention and like he was alone. He was tailoring it.
One thing I want to make a point of. The judge didn't allow any of the bullshit to come into the courtroom during trial. That made the difference here. Bottom line, within all of this nonsense and madness, the jury buys none of it. Thank goodness for the good, honest people left in the world, I'll say. So, how long does the trial go for?
5 or 6 weeks.
And what was that like for you guys?
We're still recovering. We didn't get a press pass because we're podcasters. So we actually, and a lot of the journalists, they would only get a press pass every so often. So it was a lot of sitting outside in the pre-dawn cold of Indiana, October.
You would have to get in line at midnight or 1 a.m. in order to secure a seat for the 9 a.m. court session.
All right. So how long does the jury take to find him guilty?
A while. Wasn't it like
4 or 5 days?
4 or 5 days.
They go out. The trial ends on a Thursday and the verdict comes in on Monday.
And so he's found guilty. And then what is the social media atmosphere around this time of the trial going into the guilty verdict? What are you guys feeling? What are you guys hearing? What's happening to you?
We felt like we were losing our minds because we saw the prosecution present a pretty strong case against him for guilt. Certainly something where we would have both happily voted guilty. Like it wasn't close. And we saw the defense basically like spinning their wheels for a number of days. But, mainstream and new media people were constantly coming up to us and like, oh, wow, I guess it's going to be an acquittal. And we're just like, are we on a different planet? Like, are we having are we losing our minds? Like, because we had the exact opposite feeling. And I remember having all these conversations with people and they're like, yeah, I just don't get why they focus so much on like who was on the trails and like the timeline. It's like, they're boxing him in. Like like they're boxing him into being bridge guy. And if he's bridge guy, he's the murderer.
And all throughout this entire process, there was a lot of social media people who were into conspiracy theories, who were coming up with their own crank theories, who had their own favored suspects. And if you didn't put out reporting that agreed with their preconceptions, then you were perceived as being an enemy, and perhaps you were even collaborating with the state. One time we even had a picture of our home put up on the internet with a threatening message underneath it, because we were not explicitly agreeing with their theories. We were part of the enemy and needed to be punished.
I got screamed at outside the courtroom by one of these guys who was like not even really supposed to be there because he was banned. Like, I mean, it was just like, there were just a lot of people there who I would just kindly describe as like lunatics.
I think lunatics is a good place to end the episode. It's pretty damn clear what happened out there on the train tracks and, most importantly, who is responsible beyond any doubt. My conversation with Anya and Kevin continued into the realm of the impact social media has had on true crime cases in courts. We discussed this case as compared to the Karen Reed case out of Boston. I did a 10-part podcast on the Karen Reed case. You can find it in the Crossing the Line feed. It's called 34 Fairview Road. You can also find it in its entirety on my Patreon page, patreon.com/MWilliamPhelps. I was attacked incessantly to the point of legitimate death threats by the Free Karen Reed mob. Anya and Kevin were, of course, attacked as well. Their podcast attacked. Review bombed. Same as Crossing the Line was. And the social media conspiracy mob came after them in a big way. So we discussed this at length, kind of like a little support group. And what I am going to do is post that part of our conversation as a Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps shortcut episode very soon. So keep on the lookout for that. Be back here next week with a brand new case. Be safe, be aware. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Music by Epidemic Sound. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.